Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Ashrafil Anbiya wal Mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammadi wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. Fa'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. There are many Quranic verses and many ahadith which talks about the importance of following the Quran and also following and abiding by the Sunnah and the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhal lazina amanu atiwu Allah wa atiwu Rasul, which means obey Allah, His commands. What Allah has told us to do, we should obey it. Things which Allah has told us that this is haram, adultery, wine, gambling, all these things we should refrain from. And similarly, we should also act upon the words and the sunnah and the practices of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is something which is the utmost important, and in particular when there's a lot of mischief and a lot of fitna around, it is even more important to act upon the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's why it's mentioned in a hadith that when somebody acts upon one sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the time of fitna, at the time of mischief, then he will get the reward. One narration says of one martyr, and another hadith is mentioned 100 martyrs for acting upon the sunnah or implementing the sunnah at a time where it's difficult, at a time where there's a lot of fitna and a lot of mischiefs and a lot of problems. So acting upon the sunnah is something which is very, very important, because there are certain rules which are not found in the Quran but are found in the Sunnah and the Hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'll give you an example of donkey meat. Now, to consume donkey meat is haram, but that is not mentioned in the Quran. If you look in the Quran from the first para until the 30th para, you won't find any rules about donkey meat being haram. But where do we get this rule from? We get it from the Hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there's so many examples like that where the rules are not in the Quran, but they are in the Hadith. So we have to act upon the Hadith, and we have to abide by it when it comes to Islam, when it comes to the Sharia. Now, unfortunately, in every era, there are always people who reject certain parts of Islam or certain parts of the Sharia. During Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, the mushrikeens of Makkah, they rejected the Quran. They said that the Quran is all made up and so on. And later on, after the Sahaba's time and the early generations, and now we have another fitna where you call these people Ahle Quran. And these Ahle Quran people, they say that Hadith Sunnah is not important. Just act upon the Quran, and there's no need for you to act upon Sunnah and Hadith. And because of this reason, they say that, oh, you don't have to act upon Sunnah and Hadith. You find some of them, they say that you don't have to pray 5 namazes. They say that, oh, there's no such thing as namaz, because in the Quran it doesn't say pray Fajr, pray Zuhur, pray 4 rakats, pray 2 rakats. What they do is they just sit down, they do a bit of zikr, that they remember Allah, and they think, oh, that's it, my namaz is done. Similarly, when it comes to fasting, you know, they fast, but certain rules are different from the way we fast. When it comes to zakat, they don't say that you have to give 2.5% of your annual savings. They just say that give however much you want for zakat. So these people, you call them Ahle Quran. They even say that a Muslim woman is allowed to marry a Christian man. Why? Because in the Quran there's no prohibitions regarding that. They also say that it is permissible for men to wear gold, for men to wear silk. Why? There's no prohibition of that in the Quran. So these people are known as Ahle Quran. They say that, or what is in the Quran we act upon, and what is in the Hadith and the Sunnah we don't act upon. They don't believe in Sunnah. Now this then takes me on to a very important point here, which some people ask, is that how was Hadith preserved during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, during the Sahaba's time, the Tabi'in's time, all the way up to, say, the very first compilations of the Hadith books such as Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Tirmizi, because these books like Bukhari, Muslim, they weren't there during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time. It happened, that came into existence 200-300 years afterwards. So now what we need to know is that, this 200-300 years gap where there was no books of Hadith, how did the Sahabas, how did the Tabi'ins preserve the Hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life all the way up to, say, Imam Bukhari's time, Imam Muslim's time, when the Hadith was then compiled into a book format. Now during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, the way Hadith was preserved, it was preserved mainly through memory. Mainly through memory, the Sahabas remembered Hadith. Now you may be thinking that how can the Sahabas remember hundreds and thousands of Hadiths? The answer is simple, because the Sahabas, their brain power was so great, so brilliant, than the brain power of ours in this day and age. Now why is the reason? Why is it like nowadays we find it difficult to remember one ayat of the Quran, but the Sahabas could remember ayats and hadiths? Is because a story of Imam Shafi and his teacher Waqi. The Imam Shafi went to his teacher Waqi, and he said to him, his teacher, that I find it difficult to remember. So what did his teacher Waqi say? He said to Imam Shafi that stay away from sins, or refrain from sins, because knowledge and ilm is nur, is light, and sins is darkness and zulma, and the two don't mix. Meaning, like if you want to learn the Quran and learn the Hadith, but you're doing sins at the same time, you won't be able to learn it. You have to learn knowledge, acquire knowledge, learn ilm, but at the same time, very important, you stay away from gunas, you stay away from sins. So the Sahabas, they were in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's company all the time. They stayed away from sins. So Zahir, it is obvious that they were able to remember and memorize many hundreds and thousands of hadiths from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that is the first point, that during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, many of the Sahabas preserved hadith through memory. But it doesn't mean that no hadiths were written. There are many hadiths where it actually says that during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, hadiths were also written as well. I'll just give you some examples from the hadith. There is a hadith which can be found in Sunan Abu Dawud, narrated by Abdullah bin Amr bin As radhiyallahu anhu, that Abdullah bin Amr bin As radhiyallahu anhu, what he would do is that he would write every single hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Every word Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke, he would write it out. So the Quraysh said to Abdullah bin Amr that, why are you writing every single word of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam out for? It is some words Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam may say out of anger, so you're writing that out. Some words Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam may have said out of like happiness, then you're writing it out. So if you're going to write every single word out, then which one's hadith, which one's not hadith? So then Abdullah bin Amr bin As radhiyallahu anhu then told Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that I was writing your hadiths out, but the Quraysh are telling me not to write it out. So then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then pointed his finger to his mouth, and he said, write everything out, because only haqq and the truth emanates from this mouth. So this is an example of a hadith where during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, hadiths were written. It wasn't just like memory, but hadiths were written. And there's other hadith as well, another hadith of Tirmizi, where it's mentioned that one of the Sahabas, he came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he said that we hear so many information and so many words from you, but we can't remember all of it. So then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied by saying, take help from your right hand, i.e. write it. So what we can understand from these two hadiths, there are many hadiths as well, that Sahabas would also write hadiths out as well. Now after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, there was a need of hadith, because during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, if there was any issues, they had Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to go to, and they could explain to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is the issue, and Abu sallallahu alaihi wasallam would give the fatwa, would give the ruling. But when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, now the Sahabas, they needed hadith now. What they remembered, what they heard Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say, they needed that to act upon. And the very first example we can find where the Sahabas needed hadith was when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, and the Sahabas then differed that where should we bury Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So some Sahabas were saying we should bury him here, some said in Baqi, some said here, some said there. So then Hazrat Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu then reminded everyone of a hadith that he heard Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say that whenever or wherever a prophet passes away, or whenever he passes away, he is buried where he passed away, where he died, that's the place he is buried. So when Hazrat Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu said this hadith, then all the Sahabas acted upon it, and they buried Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam there. So what I'm trying to say is that hadith, there was a need of a hadith after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, but obviously during his time there wasn't any explicit need for it. Now during the Sahaba's time, and obviously during the Tabi'in's time, as I said, there was more need to compile hadith in a book for two reasons. One reason is because many people were now converting to Islam, so they wanted to hear the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Similarly, many of the Sahabas have gone to other places in the world, not just in Arabia. They've gone to Iraq, they've gone to Persia, they've gone to Sham, Syria, Palestine, all these places they've conquered. So new people are coming to Islam, so they want to hear the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's mentioned that the very first compiler of the hadith was Tabi'i in the name of Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri. He was the very first person to compile a book on hadith. And thereafterwards, the next person to compile a book on hadith, but more in a systematic way, was Imam Malik rahimullah's Muwatta. And then afterwards you have people compiling hadiths like such as Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim, Imam Abu Dawood, Sunan al-Tirmidhi. All these authors have narrated various books on hadith, have compiled various hadiths in their particular book. Now this then takes us on to this book here, which is called Mishkatul Masabih. And this book is actually a two-part book, if that makes sense. The book which we have in front of us and which we study in Islamic schools and madarises is the expanded version of Imam Baghawi's Masabihu Sunnah, which basically the author of this book is Imam Khatib Tabrizi, and he's kind of expanded on the original work of Imam Baghawi's Masabihu Sunnah. And in this and in the original book of Imam Baghawi's Masabih, he only had two chapters, like each chapter had two fasals, like two babs. The first one was hadiths from Bukhari and Muslim, and in the second chapter there were like hadiths from the other books like Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, Nasai, Ibn Majah and so on. So what Imam Khatib Tabrizi did was that he kept the book as it is, but then he made an extra chapter, and in this third chapter, Faslu Thalith, he's brought hadiths from Bukhari, Muslim, from other books as well, which Imam Baghawi did not bring. Now the first hadith which we are going to look at is a very famous hadith narrated by Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu. And this hadith, many muhaddisins always bring this hadith first. Like Imam Bukhari has both this hadith, innamal a'malu bin niyat, firstly in his book. Imam Nawawi rahimullah in his Riyaz al-Salihin has also brought this particular hadith first in his book. So this hadith always comes first in many of the classical books of hadith. Now why? Why is this hadith comes at the beginning? Now the reason why it comes because this hadith talks about intention. Innamal a'malu bin niyat. And the idea of bringing this hadith right at the beginning is to remind everyone that the book which we are studying or the classes which we are having, we should be doing it only for Allah. Only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala happy. So even the students, the talibi ilms, when they read this hadith, they should correct the intention that I'm here coming to these classes on the Sunday to make Allah happy, to learn the blessed words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to rectify ourselves, to be good Muslims, to be good citizens. And similarly, the teachers, the asatizas, they should also, when reading this hadith, correct their intention as well. That we are not here for fame, we're not here to get a name or something like that, but we here so that we can teach the brothers, teach the sisters, and also, correct ourselves as well, rectify ourselves, and in the process make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala happy. So this hadith is always a good reminder, it's always at the beginning of the book to remind everyone of rectifying intention, that everything which we do in this world or the books of hadith which we read, it's all done for the pleasure of Allah. Now the first part of the hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, innamal a'malu bin niyat. The actions are according to intentions. Now what does this hadith mean? It means that whatever actions we do, there has to be, or it's judged by motives. Actions are judged by motives. So just say for example, if you did something, but based on your motive, it will be considered good, it will be considered bad, it will be considered acceptable. Now just say for example, this particular stereo there. Now if I was holding it and then intentionally I dropped it, I just dropped it onto the floor and it broke. Now because my intention was to break it, to drop it, that was my motive. So what I did is bad. I did nuqsan to the madrasa. But if I was holding it and I tried my best to hold it, but then I couldn't, and then it just slipped from my hand and it broke, then you're not gonna blame me because I'm actually ma'zur, I'm excused here. Why? Because my motive wasn't to drop it, it was too heavy, I couldn't hold it properly, and then it slipped from my hands. So what I'm trying to say is that actions are judged on motives. Depending on what your motives were, what your intentions were, accordingly we'll say that this is acceptable, he's excused, or he's not excused. I'll give another example which can be found in the books of fiqh. Is about someone who's hunting. Now just say someone's hunting with a spear or an arrow like they would do in olden days. Now just for example, he saw a wild deer in front of him. So he gets his spear or arrow, he throws the spear and arrow at the direction of the deer. But what happened was the deer manages to move or escape, and then that arrow hits a human being and it kills the human being. Now again, in the law of court, we don't call this person what? A murderer, because he didn't intend for the human being, did he? He intended for the animal, for the deer. So now obviously because the deer he missed the deer, or the deer managed to escape in the nick of time, and then the spear hit the human, so he won't be sent to jail, or he won't be killed, kisasan, and nafsu bin nafs. But instead what he'll have to do, he'll have to give kafara, expiation for killing someone accidentally. So that's what I'm trying to say, is that actions are judged on motives. That's one point. The second point which we can derive from here is that actions without intentions is something which is void. So whatever actions you do, you should have the intention. So that's with everything. When you read namaz, if you don't make intention for namaz, your first namaz is not going to be accepted. You just stand in namaz and say Allahu Akbar. You didn't make intention for Asr, you didn't make intention for Maghrib. You just read 4 rakats, 3 rakats. your first Asr, your first Maghrib would not be done, but instead Nafil would be done. So whatever ibadat you do, whether it's namaz, whether it's roza, fasting, whether it's zakat, you need to have intention. Even Imam Shafi says that when it comes to wuzu and ghusl, you need to have intention as well. Imam Abu Hanifa disagrees, but Imam Shafi says you need to have intention for those. So what I'm trying to say is that for ibadats, for actions, you need intentions. And also number 3, the third point which we can derive from here is that when we make the intention, it should be only for Allah. That whatever we're doing, even ibadat as well, it should be done only for the sake of Allah. Now I'll mention a hadith. It's mentioned, narrated by Sayyidina Abu Hurairah anhu, which can be found in Sahih Muslim, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that there would be 3 people who would be thrown into the fire of hell first. The first one would be an alim or a scholar. Number 2 would be someone who gives charity. And number 3 would be a warrior, a mujahid. Now the reason why them 3 would be thrown into the fire of hell first is because the alim who acquired knowledge, he didn't learn knowledge to please Allah, but he acquired knowledge to, like for fame. So people could say, mashallah, he's a Maulana, he's a Mufti, he's a Sheikh. He did it for name, he did it for fame. Similarly, the person who gave sadaqah and charity, he didn't give sadaqah and charity to please Allah, to help the poor and the needy. He gave sadaqah and charity so that people can say, mashallah, he's very, very rich, he's very, very generous, and so on. And similarly, the mujahid or the warrior who fought in the path of Allah, he didn't fight for the sake of Allah, but again he fought so that people can call him a brave person. So these people would be thrown into the fire of hell first. So what we can gather is that when it comes to intentions or niyat, we have to do it for who? Only for Allah and not for anyone else. Because as mentioned in another hadith, that Allah will then say to us that, okay, you prayed namaz for this person, go to him and ask him whether he can give you the reward of the thawab. Zahiriyah, that person is not going to be giving you any reward or thawab, so you'll be in trouble. Okay, so always correct your intentions, do islahun niyyah, always rectify your intentions in all works of life, whether it's for dars, whether it's for working, that we're trying to do everything for the sake of Allah. We're not doing it for name. When we open a madrasa, say, whatever we do, we're just doing it for Allah, obviously, and just pray to Allah all the time that He accepts it. That's also important as well, that you correct your intention, but always do dua to Allah that He accepts the action. Let's look at Ibrahim, Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam, that when they made the Baytullah, or when they reconstructed the Baytullah, and maybe thinking that, they've done the Baytullah, Allah's accepted it. No. After they made the Baytullah, what was the dua they made? Rabbana taqabbal minna. Oh Allah, accept this from us. So exactly same here as well, that just because we listening to talks, we delivering speeches or bayans, it doesn't mean Allah, and even though we rectify the intention and we're doing it to please Allah, it doesn't mean Allah's accepted it. We still have to also do dua afterwards and pray to Allah that He accepts our actions and He accepts what we are doing. Now the next part of the hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the hadith then goes on to say that for a man is what he intended, i.e. a person or a human being, whatever he intends, he'll be rewarded or he will not be rewarded. So if he did any ibadat, any worship, and he did it for Allah, inshallah he will get reward. If he did it for somebody else, he will not get reward. If his intention was for dunya motives, he will not get reward. Then the next part of the hadith says, فَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. That whoever did hijrat or migration for Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his migration is for Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In other words, if somebody did hijrah and migration for Allah, for His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then he will get the full reward and the full thawab. Okay, now what is hijrah? Just for the younger members of the audience. Hijrah and migration is when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam left Makkah Mukarramah and he went to Medina Munawwara. And the reason why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did this is because the people of Makkah were not valuing or acknowledging Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They were like taunting him, giving him a lot of problems and so on. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had to leave. Now the order was given by Allah during the month of Muharram that everyone, the Sahabas, Muslims, everyone, you have to leave Makkah and you have to go to Medina. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam left for Medina. He was the last, one of the last to leave Makkah and go to Medina in Rabiul Awwal. But in Muharram, many of the other Sahabas slowly left. So as you probably know the story that many of the Muslims had already left Makkah. So there was this kind of like eerie silence in Makkah. You know, where the Muslim populated area was, it was all dead, like there was no one there. So the Quraysh, they gathered together in a place called Darun Nadwa. That's their, like, you could say, their parliament or their White House. So they gathered together and they were deciding what they should do about Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you probably heard the story that there was a old man from Najd in the form of Shaitan. Like actually Shaitan in the form of that old man came, he knocked on the door, you know, he entered, they looked at him, they saw, you know, he looks very wise, very old and so on. So he came to give advice. So they gave certain advices that let's, you know, imprison Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, let's exile him. The old person, who in fact was Shaitan, was saying to them, no, don't exile him, don't imprison him. So then Abu Jahl gave the advice that let's kill Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So then the old man from Najd, he said, who was actually Shaitan, said, oh, that's a very good idea. And then he told them that we should kill Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, nauzubillah, tonight. You know, let's not wait until the next day, let's kill him tonight. So as the story goes on, that they all gathered around Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's house. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was inside. He told Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu to sleep in his bed. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam left his front door and he got a handful of mud and soil. And he recited the beginning verses of Surah Yasin. And when he reached فَأَغْشَيْنَاهُمْ فَهُمْ لَا يُبْصِرُونَ, he threw mud and soil in their eyes. So what happened was that when they did that, when Rasulullah did that, there was now a veil between Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the mushrikeens who were outside his house. And Rasulullah easily just walked in front of them, and they didn't realize Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had just walked in front of them. So then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, they left Makkah. They went guarded Thawr for the cave of Thawr for 3 days, and then afterwards, obviously there was some other kind of issues on the way. There was this person called Suraka bin Malik who was trying to like catch them. Eventually he converted to Islam, but Rasulullah managed to migrate to Medina Munawwara. So now what this hadith is saying is that those who migrated to Medina for Allah and His Rasul, he will get the reward. And the next part of the hadith says that whoever migrated to Medina for a dunyawi reason, for a worldly reason, or for a woman, يَتَزَوَّجُهَا فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى مَا هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِ, means that his migration would be for what he intended. And let me just quickly explain the last part of the hadith. Now there was a person, or a woman, sorry, whose name was Qais. And there was a man who eventually was known as Muhajir Qais. He wanted to get married to this woman. So this woman Qais said to the man that, okay, I accept, I'll get married to you, but the condition is that you need to migrate to Medina, because I'm migrating to Medina Munawwara. So the condition is that you need to come with me as well. So this person here, Muhajir Qais, he migrated to Medina Munawwara, yeah, but he didn't do it with the intention of hijrat and migration. His intention was marriage. Like his sweetheart, his, you could say his friend, his colleague, she was leaving Makkah, so he went to Medina not for hijrah, because remember I mentioned in a hadith that the reward of hijrah was yahdimu ma kana qabla, which means all your previous sins are forgiven. So he didn't go for that intention. He went for the intention to, because obviously his sweetheart was leaving Makkah and going to Medina Munawwara, so he was in love with this woman, he wanted to marry her, so he went for that intention. So he went for that particular intention. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that he will not have his previous sins forgiven, but instead it will be for the intention he made of the woman for worldly reason. He will get that particular intention. And this is obviously, as I said, a very important hadith. We could apply this for any walks of life. Whenever we go to a talk, whenever we go to madrasa, whenever we go to teach, if it's for dunya, if it's for worldly things, we're not getting any reward for that. Us sitting here for 2 hours or 1.5 hours is just going to be like no reward at all. But if we're doing it for the pleasure of Allah, then you'll see that there will be reward, inshallah. And then you'll see eventually there'll be more barakah in our knowledge, and that it will then help us to then act upon what we learn. The problem nowadays we have is that many people, they go to these lectures and talks or dars, but their intention isn't to learn anything. Their intention isn't for, they just want to go there because it's just like either there's food at the end. Some brothers, when you speak to them, they go to programs while there's food at the end. So now they go, they listen to the talk, they're there for 2-3 hours, listen to the talk, but they won't act upon anything because their intention is because of the kebabs or the food or the biryani at the end. So their intention is that they'll just get that. They won't get any intention, reward of listening to the talk, listening to the bayan, listening to the Quran, listening to the hadith. So very important, inshallah, to rectify your intention. When Allah gives the tawfiq,